How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
There's a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Well, hello, and welcome to the Cinema Shock.
Why do you keep saying the Cinema Shock,
It just
Gary?
feels right, because truthfully, what ends up happening is still built inside of me. It's like, oh, this is pro wrestling. I still have it built inside of me that this is the NWA. And it's the same here. Every time I start to say it, I'm still feeling Psychotronic Film Society start to come out.
Do we need to write this down for you every week?
Probably. But anyway, well, here we are. We go in depth on all your favorite
Just
cult
Cinema
genre
Shock.
movies. It's not the Cinema Shock. It's just Cinema Shock. Cinema Shock is this podcast, and I am one of your hosts of it, and my name is Gary Horde.
I am Justin Bishop. We're joined today by special guest, Mr. Todd A. Davis.
AKA TD Jakes.
Apparently. I don't know why, but before we started recording, for some reason, Gary referred to Todd as TD Jakes, I guess because of the TD.
Todd Davis.
Often
They
confused.
both have beards.
With an African
And they both love money. You thought I was going to say Jesus. You thought I was going to say Jesus, but I said money because that's more true.
It's accurate.
There you go.
Yeah. I mean,
Hey guys, thanks for having me back.
I love
Every
alienating people, our listeners.
fucking week since we've been doing this show.
So, guys, for the last 5 weeks, we've been discussing all of these movies. This is week 6 of our 6 Degrees of Kill Bill. So, for the last 5 weeks, we've discussed films that are directly referenced by Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill. I'm sure hopefully you've been listening along and enjoying these movies. This has been a fun series, hasn't it?
Yeah,
It's been fun. I've seen some
I've
stuff
really
I haven't
dug
seen
it. Yeah,
before,
it's
and
awesome.
I've enjoyed everything. for the most
Yeah, I
part.
feel like there are a couple of these I haven't seen. I think most of them I had at one point or another. Todd, I think, has not seen any of these until we started watching the series. Were any of these rewatches for you, Todd?
No, none of these were
all
rewatch-
new.
Yeah, these were all new. For
We're
me.
expanding Todd's film watching horizon.
Well, and I was just gonna say, like, even if there was stuff that I wasn't super into, I really enjoy the fact, like, sitting down to watch it and being able to speak knowledgeably about, like, I've seen it. I'm not super into it, but I have seen it and can tell you whatever. And I love that. I love being able to follow along with you guys.
Well,
and do
I love
the
it too. It's fun to not be the the only person who hasn't seen a movie. I have enjoyed that, so I don't feel stupid when I'm talking to Justin the whole time. We've had the experiences like watching Thriller, where I had to temper my dislike of the movie so that it didn't offend DJ and his tattoo. Like, I still feel guilty that I didn't like it more.
You don't have to like everything. Nobody says you do.
Yeah, that's true.
So a lot of the films that we've talked about, they have been, I mean, some of them are referenced pretty obviously by Kill Bill. Some of them it's a more aesthetic reference. Like Thriller and Game of Death. Thriller is a revenge movie, but it's mostly the aesthetic of the one eye and as L Driver. While others, like especially Lady Snowblood and Death Rides a Horse, I would say, directly influence the plot of Kill Bill. But this week, for the 6th and final film in this series, we are watching a movie that has a little bit of plot, inspiration for Kill Bill. But this one's unique in that this is the only movie in the series that characters from Kill Bill are actually seen watching during the movie. So this is going to be a really fun one. And that movie, of course, that we're talking about this week is the 1980 film Shogun Assassin.
Journey through a lost empire of mad wizards and barbaric passions. Behold the saga of a legendary warrior, a loving father who has the power of a dozen armies in one sweep of his mystic blade. This is a story of honor, disgrace, vengeance, massacre, and a man who became a demon. Shogun Assassin.
So Shogun Assassin is actually a re-edit of two older films, the first two films in the Lone Wolf and Cub series. And the Lone Wolf and Cub films themselves were adaptations of a manga, and much like one that we discussed a few weeks ago, Lady Snowblood. And like Lady Snowblood, the Lone Wolf and Cub manga was written by Kazuo Koike. So we're back in this guy's brain. I love his brain, honestly.
I do too.
I love listening to interviews with this guy. He's awesome.
He seems like he'd be a lot of fun to have a whiskey with, just to sit out and have a
Santori.
A Santori with.
There you
exactly.
go. Yeah, now we're talking.
Yeah, like, I mean, the Lady Snowblood thing, and now this, like, he, I
mean, he's dead now, so it'd be really odd to do that
seems
now.
more fun to me now.
Yeah, he died in 2019. So he died about a year and a half ago.
Yeah. But yeah, this is technically Lone Wolf was started before Snowblood, but both were, super successful.
Yeah. So the idea behind Lone Wolf and Cub kind of began to form in Koike's mind in the mid 1960s when he, we discussed this a little bit during our Lady Snowblood episode, but Koike is a student of Buddhism and specifically the Bushido Code, which is another rabbit hole we won't go down right now, but it's basically the samurai code. And he felt that the parent-child bonds were beginning to erode all across Japanese society, and he wanted to write a story that would set a positive example. So out of this
first
idea,
things first, kill the mom.
Well, hey, you got to start somewhere.
Show the mom's titty and then kill her.
Yeah. I was like, I was super whole. It's like, is she pulling out like a charm or like a note to stick with the baby or something? Nope. Just whip it out the titty.
Baby got to eat.
True.
Come on.
Yeah.
So he got out of this kind of idea formed a story about a samurai raising a son alone. And he actually had an infant nephew that served as inspiration for the character, for the child, Daigoro. So what you have to understand, we didn't discuss this a lot during our Lady Snowblood episode, but it is hard to understate just how big manga and comic books were, specifically the comic books created for the adult market, were in Japan at this time. Like it was an industry that rivaled film and television for audience size and cultural relevance. And Koike was one of the giants of the movement. Like he was huge. I mean, if you look at this guy's bibliography, it is massive. And this was what he considers his magnum opus. It probably is the most impactful, most culturally huge thing that he ever wrote. But he's written a lot of stuff that is like, this is one of many of his works that have been adapted into film or television or anime, for example.
I feel embarrassed that, like, even at the time of Lady Snowblood, I didn't realize who I was talking about because, like, well, look, and nobody on the podcast can see this, but I have these. I have
nice.
The first few. And
there's 28 of them. So
yeah. So I don't have all of them, but what I was just showing them is the Lone Wolf and Cub collection. I think now there's actually like a bigger version of it, like a omnibus version of them.
I'm ashamed to say, like, as you were giving us the intro, Justin, I was checking my Comixology account. I was like, do I have any Lone Wolf and Cub? And sadly, I don't. And I really enjoyed this, so now I'm definitely going to seek out the original manga.
Well, it's pretty similar. I mean, there's if you watch the Japanese versions, it catches more closely with this. But anyway, to go back to what Justin was talking about, the first part of it, similar to what Koike's tackling with Lady Snowblood, he's got to focus on something he feels is lost in modernizing Japan. Last time he relied on Norio Asada to kind of realize that on the screenplay, but get the basic thought when he was adapting it. But in this one, he actually gets to tackle it himself as a screenwriter on the original thing.
Yeah.
And we only touched on Koike just a little bit, but I just wanted to say too, like, yeah, you were kind of going into this. I mean, he's a big deal. He was, I mean, and not just in comics, like he was a TV host. He started some golf magazine. He was a poet, famous for that. He obviously, like we're finding out here, he wrote screenplays, but he'll always be known for the manga side of things. So between like Lone Wolf, Snowblood, there's one called Crying Freeman that he did.
Crying Freeman that was adapted into a movie by Christoph Gans.
Yeah.
Back in, I don't know, late 90s probably. It's got Mark Dacascos in it.
I think that's right. The guy from Double Dragon.
He's in a lot more better movies than Double Dragon, but yes, he is in Double Dragon.
But also, Koike ended up mentoring like so many manga creators later on. He was pretty responsible for how huge manga became in Japan.
Yeah.
Of course, and his main driving focus always, and you can tell this, is in his words, the quote I found from that I liked is, the comics are carried by characters. If a character is well created, the comic will become a hit.
Yeah. He's in the Eisner Award Hall of Fame. Like, he's a huge presence in the comic world. Todd, you'll appreciate this, but around the time he was writing Lone Wolf and Cub, he did write a Hulk manga.
Really?
It's called Hulk the manga.
Okay.
It came out between 1970 and 1971, but yeah, it is an adaptation of the Marvel character Hulk.
I'm writing it down.
Yeah, pretty cool. I'm not sure what the availability is.
And actually, now that you say that, that feels actually like perfect for him. That feels like the character he should tackle.
Yeah, there was a Spider-Man manga and an X-Men one that were all published around the same time. He did not write those, but it was part of that same sort of series.
Wait a minute. This is the one, like, when did you say this was?
1970, 1971.
Oh, okay. I was thinking about when they did the redesign of Spider-Man, like looking like Scotty Young, almost like kind of took over that look.
Legend of the Spider Clan.
Yeah.
No, this would have been in the early 70s, and it actually has a different character as Spider-Man. It's not Peter Parker. It's another character's name, a Japanese name, and it's set in Japan, but it's essentially the same kind of.
Marvel. I think Marvel does more of this than DC does, but I think Marvel has circled around back to definitely embracing the Japanese culture and style in terms of storytelling. I've just finished watching the Marvel, I believe it's Marvel 616 documentary on Disney Plus, talking about the Japanese Spider-Man. And it's a fascinating story.
The live action?
Yeah, the live action one, which looks super cheesy until like you hear the story of like, oh, okay, that's why they did, X, Y, and Z.
Well, one of the crazy parts with this too, you're talking about comics and like your appreciation of comics is that, I mean, the thing to understand with Japan is that we're not talking like Marvel created the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's like manga, it's like if manga or if Marvel comics were just as popular as what's on in the movie theaters.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they are huge. Like, everyone is reading these books at this time.
Right.
And he was at the forefront of this. And another guy that was at the forefront of this was an artist by the name of Goseki Kojima. So Kojima, he and Koike worked together a lot, including on Lone Wolf and Cub. They worked together on quite a few series, but this was the first one that they worked on. And Kojima is a self-proclaimed film fan. He began his career in like painting. He was a painter initially. He did movie advertisements. He worked as a projectionist in a movie theater. He was always sort of very inspired by film in his arts. Like, if you look at the Lone Wolf and Cub comics, they are not structured like the images are not structured like your typical comic book. They're very cinematic. So, and he says that he was equally influenced by Japanese, kind of traditional Japanese aesthetics, which you can definitely see in this comic, film technique, and pure pulp entertainment. He was kind of the perfect person to capture this story.
If anybody out there is hearing this and being like, you know what, I dig film, but I also dig comics, and I want to get into this a little bit more, I highly recommend Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, because he does an in-depth study of not only how your brain interprets comics, but the different styles of comics and specifically manga. So I highly recommend that book, Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, and really get into his breakdown of manga and how it is very cinematic, and it's
Yeah.
really awesome.
So Lone Wolf and Cub as a manga was first released in Japan in an issue of Manga Action magazine in 1970. It was serialized, and it was almost instantly a hit. It sold something like 8 million copies, and it is an epic series in every sense of the word. Like it ran from September 1970 until April 1976. It spans 28 volumes, with each volume over 300 pages apiece. For a grand total of there's more than 8,700 pages making up this entire series. It is ridiculously big.
Well,
which makes it all the more impressive that the film series is able to capture the heart of it as well as it does.
Well, yeah, and not only, I mean, for Koike, I mean, he's also doing Lady Snowblood at this time at a point. Like he
Right.
eventually starts Lady Snowblood, so he's overlapping like storytelling in both these places, and so he's.
Did they ever cross over?
I don't think.
I mean, like, I'm not trying to make a joke or anything, like, because that would have been really fucking awesome.
They're set during different historical periods.
That's true. Yeah,
okay.
two different
if
time
you,
periods.
If you remember when we talked about Lady Snowblood, that takes place during the Meiji period. This takes place during the Edo period, which is the period that takes place right before that. It kind of takes place towards the end of that period, because you do see a little bit of modernization creeping in. In some of the later Lone Wolf and Cub movies, you see there are guns involved. There are people. There's a guy who wields pistols. There's soldiers with muskets. But this does take place a significant amount of time beforehand, so that wouldn't have really been possible in the world of the characters.
Koike and Kojima together, though, just to round that out, they were known as the Golden Duo. They were like the pinnacle of the manga world. And in fact, when there was a magazine that came out that was huge in Japan called Manga Japan Magazine, launched in 1994, and it was going to be like the place where it collected all the greatest manga, or like everybody wanted a piece of that. If you were an aspiring artist or creator or something, Kojima was actually hired as a consultant on the magazine just so he would train Japan's next generation of artists. Like everybody was just like, let's build on what he's already doing. In his later years,
sounds like a Japanese version of heavy metal.
Yeah. And in his later years, for what it's worth, he turned to doing his own, like, just original graphic novels, but loosely. He died in 2000. Koike, like you said, died in 2019. But his last few years, he was just doing original graphic novels based on the works of his favorite film director, which was Akira Kurosawa.
Wow.
Nice. Very
And
cool.
Again, for any comic fans out there who aren't quite grasping the size and of that amount of work, at one point Brian Michael Bendis was considered like the workhorse of all workhorses. I think he was working on 6 or 7 Marvel titles at one time, and that amount of work doesn't scratch the surface of this. Like, this is huge.
So it was incredibly popular, and the film rights to the comic were snatched up pretty quickly, and development began on an adaptation, initially as a single television movie. The first choice to play Ito Agami was an actor by the name of Tetsuya Watari. He's a matinee star at the time. A couple weeks ago on the Lady Snowblood episode, I believe it was, we were talking about Nikatsu Noir, those films that were being produced by the Nikatsu studio at the time. One of those is a movie called Tokyo Drifter. Highly, highly recommended it. It might have even been my further viewing or one of those on that episode. But this guy Watari, he is the star of that movie. He was kind of a big star at the time. He wasn't able to do it because he had fallen ill, had to pass. And so an actor by the name of Shintaro Katsu, who is the star of the long-running Zatoichi film series, was approached to play the role. Now,
Justin, I have a question. When you say a matinee star, and if this is dumb, you can cut it out. But when you say a matinee star, what makes a matinee star?
Today, somebody might be listening, Todd, that has that exact same question.
Well, I am the audience surrogate, so here we go.
He's a matinee. He's a box office draw.
Okay.
And he is a matinee idol, teen idol type. He's older than a teen idol, but he was I would say an American version of what I would call a matinee idol or a matinee star, is someone like Brad Pitt. You know,
Okay.
very well liked, a big box office draw. The women want to be with him and the men want to be him.
Okay. I didn't know if like matinee star meant was like he's in films that are only shown earlier in the day, or
That's not what matinee always means.
no, that's fine. Now I know.
He's the early bird special of movie stars.
That's what I was like. Is that a thing in Japan?
So Shintaro Katsu's given name at birth was Toshiya Okumura. He had a long career in the Japanese film industry, and although he'd had a lot of success as an actor in not only Zatoichi, but in a couple of other long-running series. They didn't run quite as long as Zatoichi, but he was in the long-running Akumio series and the Hoodlum Soldier series. He was a contracted actor with Daiei Company, one of the major studios in Japan at the time. And as a contracted actor, he was forced to play in a lot of stuff that he just didn't like. That's what happens when you have a contract with a studio. That's why, studios don't have that now. Stars have enough clout to not have to do that anymore. But he had to make a lot of movies that he thought were shit, basically. He literally said, like, about some of the movies he was in, he was like, these movies should be burned.
Oh, jeez.
So he got tired of being in these movies that he wasn't proud of, So he formed his own production company so that he could choose the types of films that he would make.
Some people like it's not sorry, I was just thinking about this. I was like, who would fit it perfectly in this system would be like a Nicolas Cage. He'd just be like, fucking bring it.
Yeah, just do it.
Yeah.
But that's how we got Katsu Productions.
Nice.
But Katsu was busy with Zatoichi and his other film roles, so he was not able to star in Lone Wolf and Cub himself, but he saw potential in the material. And he also saw that its potential was much bigger than what could be contained on the small screen. So he acquired the rights to it himself under the banner of his own production company. But still, the movie needed a star. And luckily, Katsu knew someone who might be perfect for the role, someone who felt that they were perfect for the role, and someone who happened to be a big fan of the comics, which was an actor by the name of Tomisaburo Wakayama. So Wakayama was born as Masuro Akumura. He's an actor from Tokyo who'd grown up in the theater. His father was a man named Minoru Okumura, who was a well-known kabuki performer. The entire family, they were all kabuki performers. And yeah, it sounds like a coincidence that he and Katsu have the same last name. It is because they are in fact brothers. They both changed their names, but they are actually, Wakayama is the older brother of Shintaro Katsu.
This is the Charlie Sheen and Emilio Estevez of China.
Oh, there you go.
That's Japan, Gary.
Oh, Japan. Why did I say China? I don't know.
Wakayama and his younger brother, they followed their father into the theater, but by the time that he had hit his teens, Wakayama had kind of begun to lose interest, and he found a new love, which was judo. So while he would continue to act, he devoted a lot of his life to the art of judo, eventually becoming a 4th-degree black belt in the martial art.
Judo's dope. It's really a lot of fun.
As he got older, he continued to perform kabuki.
That was a quote from him, by the way.
Judo's dope.
Judo's dope.
But he even, he even toured the U.S. for 9 months in 1952 as part of the Azumi Kabuki troupe. But once his 2-year run with that group was over, he basically decided, I'm giving up theater completely, and he began teaching judo full time. And he continued to teach until he was recruited by Toho. Toho, of course, being one of the biggest studios, if not the biggest studio in Japan at the time. And they wanted him to be the new martial arts star in their, I'm going to try to pronounce this, Gary.
Oh, I was waiting for it.
Jidaigeki films. Those are what they call period dramas. So these are movies like this. I mean, Lady Snowblood could technically be considered one as well. It's a period film set during, 100 years ago or more in Japan.
Were you going to make a period joke, Gary?
It's Lady Snowblood is a period.
There it is. There it is, ladies and gentlemen.
I was going to ignore it until he just like put that sentence together. And it's like, how can I not bring that up?
I'm proud of us, honestly. I'm proud of us as a group, as a podcast. I think we're doing really well.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So to prepare for his roles in these movies, he began to practice other martial arts disciplines such as Kenpo, Aido, Kendo, and Bojutsu. And a lot of those, I had to look them up. I'm not going to pretend I knew what all those were. Kendo's the only one I knew, and that's because of Steve Blackman, probably.
Yeah, that's probably the same reason I know it. Yeah, WWF superstar Steve Blackman in the Attitude Era. One of those is competitive eating, if you're curious.
I don't think that's true.
Oh, but it's so much fun to think.
Is that a fat joke? Are you making fun of?
I just made a fat joke about Wakayama. Sorry.
That is one man I would not make a fat joke about because he will rip your head off.
Well, the only reason I feel comfortable as a chubbier man myself, I feel comfortable that it's like, it's like black people make black jokes. It's okay. I'm a fat man. I can make fat jokes. So it's fine.
But those are, a lot of those are martial arts that involve training with weapons. Of course, Kendo being the stick. Bojutsu and Aido are both types of sword play. Mm-hmm. I don't know enough about them to tell you the difference between the two.
I mean, it goes along.
Todd's always challenging me to sword play. When we're showering, it's weird. It's a whole thing. Anyway,
it's just to pass the time. A lot of those styles, especially the sword stuff, lends itself well to the samurai.
Right. I mean, which is why he's training to do this.
Right.
And
I had a game for PlayStation back in the day. It's like I can feel Justin being like, God, shut up. But I had a game for PlayStation. It was called Bushido Blade. And I meant to bring this up earlier, but man, that game was annoying as hell because it was like all based on samurai tradition. So you're used to like fighting games like Mortal Kombat, where like not only is everything on the table, it's like fucking magic too. And Bushido Blade was straight up like samurais just fighting. And so they had swords, and so they'd like clang together. And there were rules. Like you had to honor the traditions of Bushido. So like sometimes like you might swing and hit the guy, like the swords would connect, but he'd spin. And if you attacked him immediately after and hit him from behind, you lost points because you attacked them from behind.
Oh, wow.
Because in Bushido, like
that
you had
like
to
a
face off.
video game.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Like I've always remembered that game for being just like, come on, man. Like this.
Yeah.
No, this is why you people still don't know what Bushido Blade was.
Hold on. What do you mean? What do you mean, you people?
Oh my God, Todd.
Damn,
nobody said that.
You just said you people.
Well, I thought I said this is why people.
You said you people, but Todd
said you people,
had to get weird with it.
Well, okay, this is why you people, meaning you white nerds, don't know what Bushido Blade is.
Todd's just determined to get us in trouble. So this additional training helped Wakayama to land roles in a few. I mean, he was making a lot of movies at this time, but this specifically kind of launched him into a period where he was making a lot of these types of movies. He was in a TV series called The Mute Samurai in 1973, a TV series in 1975 called The Bounty Hunter, but it was his role as Ogami Ito in Lone Wolf and Cub for which he is most well known. Now, you'll notice there's a lot of obvious kind of yada, yada, yada here in this because he quits theater. When we were talking about him quitting the theater to teach judo, that was in the early 1950s.
Wow.
And this is, he's later, then we say, oh yeah, then he was recruited by Toho. That's 20 years later, basically.
I was gonna say, how old was this dude when he did this movie?
Yeah. I'd have to look it up. I cannot remember. I want to say he was in his 40s. He's in his 40s at this point.
Wow. Yeah, he must have been teaching judo like as a teenager.
Well, he was probably in his early 20s, late teens, early 20s when he began.
Wow.
So he began his film career in 1955. He was making stuff. He was not doing theater, but he was doing film. And by my count, and by that I mean I looked at his filmography and counted one by one. Between the time that he started and the time that he made Lone Wolf and Cub, he had already appeared in 132 movies.
Holy shit.
Which is insane.
God, that's really impressive.
So throughout his career, he'd been a player at multiple Japanese film studios. He started with Toho, but he would later work with Toei and Dai, and then back to Toei. So it was during this later stint at Toei that he discovered the Lone Wolf and Cub comic series, which was being published as a serial at the time. And he immediately knew that he wanted to turn this into a film. Unfortunately, Toei wasn't making period films at that time. They were making a lot of Yakuza movies, which were really popular at the time, and they had really no interest in making a period samurai movie. But Wakayama loved making these period dramas. This is kind of what he was known for, and being a skilled swordsman, they played to his strengths as a martial artist, you know? So like he was a natural for these, and if they're not going to make them, what's he going to do? You know?
I mean,
Obviously eat his feelings.
Oh my God! You stop making jokes about.
Just kidding. I'm just kidding. I saw
Not
this.
even that
The only
fat.
reason I bring this up,
He's just husky.
I had no problem accepting this guy, but don't tell me you guys in your research didn't stumble upon review after review talking about the chubby samurai that's wandering. I mean, so many reviews talked about it.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I guess I think of, the sumo guys are huge. I mean, but that's all. I mean, they're all like solid. I just figured it was kind of like, well, they're not all rail thin. Like, you know, some of them are going to have some heft, some meat. But anyway, I was going to say, it's kind of surprising to me that Toei wasn't into period samurai films, because I would. Well, they were. I mean, I would equate those to like the the westerns that were made here. I would think that they would be fairly inexpensive to make, and you could crank them out fairly quickly.
But if they're not going to be, if they're losing popularity with the audiences, especially with younger audiences, then that's not a solid investment. Same reason that we don't see any westerns being made now.
I was about to say, I would say that westerns are suffering the same fate. I mean, at least at the time, westerns were, gunplay. You're talking about period dramas of like a time nobody connected to. I mean, Japan modernized big time. Right. And you're talking about this guy walking around with a sword, just in honor and like these things, which by the way is what Koike's totally focused on.
Right.
That he's, that he cares about like capturing from Japan's history. These are things that are just, in the modern age, they start getting more and more lost. Like they're just, what is this about? There's no guns. Nobody's shooting at each other. We want to do gang movies.
Yeah. Yakuza movies were very popular.
Makes sense.
So after his brother's production company bought the rights to the comic, Wakayama was even more determined to play the role, despite the fact that, as Gary has pointed out, and as everyone seems to want to point out to Wakayama, he did not physically fit the bill for the character in the comic. Because if you look at the character in the comic, he's a pretty fit, comic book. He's a comic book character,
he's got like pecs fit. And he's abs and he's
got this like strong jawline and he looks fucking cool,
Yeah, right.
So here's what Wakayama does. He shows up at Kazuo Koike's home, unannounced and uninvited. He wants to get blessing from the creator of the manga himself. He doesn't have to do this because his brother owns the rights, so he could potentially cast whoever he wanted, but he wanted Koike's blessing. He wanted to prove to this guy, because he's a big fan of the comics. So for him, this is probably he feels like he needs to get this guy's blessing in order to play this character that he loves so much.
Well, this is part of the reason I bring it up too, is because this is a big deal. And you got to think, Koike, once he got so far as to do a screenplay, but to go back to the Snowblood thing real quick, one of the things he says, like in interviews you see from him, is like, he was, if anything, he's the easiest guy who's like, well, I wrote it. I made what I wanted to make. And now I'm handing it over to filmmakers, and I just have to trust the process that hopefully they get the idea. So he's not like a guy who's like super like railing on this thing to be perfect.
He's not like precious about it, because he's created his art.
Exactly.
So the way that Koike tells the story, Wakayama shows up, introduce himself by marching right into his office and saying, "Watch," and then he cuts a flip in the air. And he says, "See, I'm fat, but I can do this." So, and the other version of the story that's included in the essay that comes with the criterion of Lone Wolf and Cub is that he not only did that, but he had his practice sword, his like bamboo practice sword, and did an entire like routine like in the front yard of Kazuo Koike's house, like proving to him that
Stewart on it was like, hey, look what I can do.
Well, I was just gonna say it's like what Tom Savini did.
Yeah, I mean, essentially,
actually, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's basically the exact
So,
same.
To young actors out there, just find the producer, director you want to work with, and
Show up at their house,
their home
with a sword.
And, with a sword, or any bladed weapon will do.
Or pretend you're killing yourself, like right in front of them.
Yeah,
and they'll hire you.
Wakayama had it like,
don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do anything that we say ever.
If we're worried about getting canceled, I feel like that's the one that's going to show up on CNN later. The quote saying like, "This is what you do."
No one understands me. Everybody's hating me. I'm gonna show up at this director's house because the guys on Cinema Shock told me to.
Well, you guys can't see as it Todd is furiously writing a note, which is a really great visual gag for a podcast.
You're welcome.
What you also can't see is inside my mind where I'm like, potentially though, that could lead to so many downloads.
But Wakayama, basically, he was determined. He had it in his mind. He was going to play Lone Wolf. Like, he was ready. And this, by the way, this worked on Kazuo Koike. He was sold. Like, I guess he liked his enthusiasm, but he also liked his, like, he saw what he could physically do, because Wakayama is doing shit in this movie as a man who is much larger than me that I could never physically do. And he's older than I am at this point, and he's got 6 of these movies ahead of him.
I was just going to say, and he just looks so much more badass than any of us. Like, he's just like on the level with like Clint Eastwood, like just with the
Stone
face
cold. Yeah. Just,
constant scowl.
Stare that
he had to see that. Like, he had to see that part of it too. It's like, this guy looks serious. Like, you would not fuck with this guy. So many people did, thankfully, for this movie, but you should not.
As I was watching the series, a few movies into it, I'm like trying to picture what he might look like smiling, and I could not do it. Like, I could not look at his face and physically figure out how a smile would form on it.
I think that's why I went to Clint Eastwood. Like, can you picture Clint Eastwood with just a big, hefty grin on his face? Like,
I mean, that movie with the monkey that he did, he smiles. Surely he smiles in that one. How do you not smile when your co-star's an orangutan?
I just appreciate the fact that you probably didn't tune into an episode talking about Shogun Assassin expecting that we would end up on Any Which Way But Loose.
You never know. You never know where we're going to go on this show. So anyway, before production on the film could officially begin, it hit a bit of a roadblock. So first of all, even with Koike's blessing, there was an issue with the fact that the two brothers, Katsu and Wakayama, worked for rival studios. Because you see, Katsu Productions had a deal with Daiei. They helped to distribute most of the films that Katsu was producing. Meanwhile, Wakayama had a contract with Toei. So while this initially caused problems, Katsu, luckily, he'd been in the business for a long time, and he was able to call in a favor from the president of Toei, who gave Wakayama permission to star in the film. But then in December of 1971, while Katsu is in their initial planning stages for the film, Daiei declares bankruptcy, which essentially turned the whole project into an indie film without guaranteed distribution now. And Katsu is scrambling to use the locations and the key staff that they had rented from Daiei studio facilities.
Wow.
What Justin's saying here, for like the most accurate pop culture reference that I'm sure everyone would get, is that this is essentially, the first part of this is like current time as we're recording this. Kenny Omega works for AEW and Tony Khan, but they cut a deal with Impact. And
this is something that everyone's going to understand, right?
Yeah, they cut a deal with Impact Wrestling, which is a different promotion, and they used it to reform a group that they had in New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Was this Bullet Club?
Bullet Club. So they reformed Bullet Club from these two other promotions that were separate from this third promotion that Bullet Club actually existed in, and it was just a crazy deal. They were like, "We'll let it happen. Let's see what we can get out of it." And then They all went out of business.
Well,
Justin, when do I get to make?
And we'll
when do I
see.
get
We'll
to make
see
my?
if you're listening to this 3 years later. I wonder if AEW is still in business.
if you are
Justin,
playing Cinema
When do I
Shock
get to make my Star
Bingo,
Trek metaphor?
I believe we started the show with that shit.
Oh, that's
I think-
right. Oh, that's
yeah.
So if you're playing Cinema Shock Bingo, you can now cross off the square where Gary makes a wrestling reference.
I just was thinking, during last podcast, Ben Kissel always gets to make wrestling references. So why
That
should
no
I
one else
hold back?
understands.
Why should I hold back on this?
So as you may have noted, like as we discussed the film histories of all these actors and studios, there were a lot of multi-film series being produced quickly and cheaply during this period in Japanese film history. And Wakayama himself appeared in some of these types of films as well. One series that he appeared in was one called Hibotan Bakudo. And it was a multi-film series. I think it's like 5 or 6 films. And it was during the filming of this series that he approached his director, a guy named Buchi Saito, a guy who is very fun in interviews. I don't know if you watched any interviews with him, Gary, but he's a character. And this is a guy that Wakayama had worked with in other series on the past. So they had a good relationship. And he asked him if he would like to direct the first Lone Wolf and Cub film for him. And Buchi Saito said no. It wasn't that he didn't want to do it. It was he was busy at the time. He was making another film, although he would actually later return and direct the 4th film in the Lone Wolf series. So instead, Wakayama went with a director by the name of Kenji Musumi.
Wait, did Wakayama
Misumi,
try
excuse me.
cutting a flip in front of him in his office?
Well, he'd
or
already
something?
seen him flipping. They
okay.
were making movies together.
Oh, okay.
So-
Gotcha.
He knew what he had.
Instead, we've got Kenji Misumi. Misumi had begun his career after World War II, and he became an incredibly successful and very prolific director for Daiei, mainly directing samurai and period films. And his successes led to Daiei actually offering to let him direct some of their more prestigious films, because these samurai films were kind of seen, unless Kurosawa was making them, they were considered, lower tier films. But he liked working on these Chenbara films is what they call. That's what they referred to as these samurai movies, swordplay movies specifically. It's what Chenbara films are.
Oh, I thought it was the little creature from like Mexican folklore.
That's a chupacabra.
Oh, all right.
Close.
And he actually directed the first film in the Zatoichi series, starring Shintaro Katsu in 1962. He directed several other Chenbara films in the 60s, including several other films in the Zatoichi series. So he had a working history with Katsu.
I actually feel like this is a strong get. Like because one of the important parts about Koike, his original story and the screenplay is the historical aspect. And you've got a guy who is very, like, his skill level is high. And when it comes to period directed films.
Yeah, he's got a lot of experience doing this stuff. So in 1971, he was released from his contract with Daiei when the studio filed for bankruptcy. And he was worried that this was sort of the end of things for him, because he was making these samurai movies for them. Not a lot of other studios were making samurai movies. And he had already begun working with Katsu a year earlier on one of the Zatoichi films. Those Zatoichi films were produced by Katsu Productions as well. But he was kind of afraid that the period drama films that he loved making so much were soon going to only be able to be made for television, not for the big screen. So when he was offered the chance to work on Lone Wolf and Cub, he kind of jumped at it, But then there was also this fear that these period dramas were seen as too old-fashioned for modern audiences. So Misumi added a lot of over-the-top violence to the film, something that mirrored the manga visually, but that was kind of rarely seen in these types of films at the time. The exception being, there are some of the Kurosawa movies, Yojimbo and Sanjuro specifically, that introduce the visual of like the blood spraying out of a wound. But primarily a lot of these samurai movies of the time were fairly bloodless.
Yeah, you can only assume that ninjas have very high blood pressure. Like, from watching this, like, it just seems like they should be on medication.
Very stressful.
When someone cuts their head off, it just is like, here we go, we're out. Splash waterfalls at Six Flags, baby.
The first Lone Wolf and Cub movie was called Lone Wolf and Cub Sword of Vengeance. At least that was the English title. It was released in Japan on January 15th, 1972, where it was distributed by Toho. They worked it out with Toho to distribute the film. Toho also released it in the US with English subtitles in August of 1972, a few months later. The film had been a success, and a second film in the series was already planned, and that was released only a few months later. So the first film was released in January of 1972. Second movie was released in April of 1972, just a little over 4 months later. And pretty much all of the creative team, including director Kenji Misumi, returned for the sequel. And the sequel really doubles down on the first film's depiction of over-the-top cartoonish violence. I mean, that is, in my estimation, like the film that really sets the tone for the whole series, is the second film in the series. And it was that excess that caught the attention of American filmmakers Robert Houston and David Weissman. So David Weissman is he's an established filmmaker. Like, he had been the assistant to Otto Preminger years earlier. He was a protege of Andy Warhol. He was a frequent fixture at Andy Warhol's factory. And he had been a big fan of the Lone Wolf Cub comics. So using funds that he made from his first film, the 1972 Edie Sedgwick vehicle Chow Manhattan, for which he'd won several awards, he purchased the rights to the film from Toho for $50,000. So with his partner, Robert Houston, who himself was a filmmaker and actor, mostly known for playing Bobby in Wes Craven's
Bobby.
The Hills Have Eyes.
There
Bobby's
you
a
go.
dumbass.
He is, yeah.
I don't know if you've seen The Hills Have Eyes, but Bobby's a dumbass. The two went about recutting the films and adding their own voices to it. They even hired a team of deaf lip readers to help write dialogue that would kind of sort of fit the images. So it's, as a result, it's one of the better dub jobs that I've seen. I mean, it
totally
clearly does
agree with that. It's pretty fantastic.
It's really impressive. And I'm normally very anti watching dubbed versions of foreign films, but this is kind of a different thing, because they created an entirely different movie out of this.
Well, so I mean, just throwing this out there. I mean, I knew nothing about this movie going into it, and so a lot of the stuff, if you do even the base amount of research, you can find out that this was the first two Lone Wolf and Cub movies edited together and that sort of thing. But when I pulled this up on the Criterion channel, is where I watched it, and it was the dub version. I immediately was like, no, I don't think I'm supposed to watch this. Like, why did I just end up in the dub version? And it took a minute to find out, no, this is how this movie is.
If it's Shogun Assassin, it is the dub version.
Yeah, it's the dub version. And it's the first two Lone Wolf and Cub movies edited together. And those are also, by the way, on the Criterion channel.
All 6 of them are. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it just, but as I watched it, I don't know, man. I had no problem with it. I had no problem with the dub.
Good. It really is.
Yeah. It really is. It's very smooth.
So Shogun Assassin contains footage from the first two Lone Wolf and Cub movies, as Gary mentioned, but it is mostly the second movie. It contains about 12 minutes from Sword of Vengeance, the first film, with the majority of the film, about 70 minutes, comprised of footage from the second film, which is called Baby Cart at the River Styx. And it's not as if they just show you the first 12 minutes of the first one, then cut it and you go into the second one. It's a completely different edit. Completely
they skip over some plot details in the first one. They
change a lot of the plot.
Yeah,
honestly.
So they kind of,
because in the original Lone Wolf and Cub series, Ito Agami's main adversary is not the Shogun, it's the Yagyu clan. There's a rival clan, and they're the ones who frame him for killing his wife. That's a completely different story than what you get here. In fact, the guy who you see as the Shogun in Shogun Assassin is not the Shogun in Lone Wolf and Cub. He is the leader of the Yagyu clan, the guy with the white hair and the white eyebrows.
Yeah.
So they completely changed the story. I mean, there are elements of it. Obviously, there have to be elements of it that are very much the same, but
they're all other fucking stories. There's the dude with the and you may have to forgive me here if I'm confusing the manga with the movie, but there's the guy with the revolvers who is chasing him down.
Yeah, that's in one of the I've watched 4 of these movies this week. So some of the Lone Wolf and Cub movies, 5 if you count Shogun Assassin.
Well, that's what I feel like.
So
I
some
had
of them
the first 2 on in the background while I was working, and I was like,
yeah, there's definitely a guy with a revolver or with 2 revolvers in one of them, and I do not remember if it's one of the first 2.
he ends up
Lone
being a
Wolf
dude
movies,
that was
or if
like
it's the
in
third one.
competition with this dude for being the executioner for the Shogun, and fucks up, and so his whole he becomes like he's just wanting vengeance on.
Are you talking about? Is it the guy who they in I want to say the third film? There's a guy who was in competition, and they fake his death by getting this other dude. Have you seen this, Gary?
No, I don't think.
Did you watch
the third one?
Okay, and so this is a slight spoiler, but it's fucking cool. So I'm going to tell you anyway. So in the third one, there's this guy who's like in competition for the Shogun's executioner against Ogami, and he fails, and like they have to like battle each other essentially, and the winner gets the job.
Right.
He fails, and the leader of his clan admires him as a swordsman, so he's sparing his life, but they need to make it look like he has committed harikiri. So they get this guy to come in who is, they call him like the face maker or something like that. And this guy comes in and he puts this like mask on his face and molds it. It's like fucking Mission Impossible. And he turns into the other guy, and then he has the other guy's face, and then he kills himself.
But it's like the reason he fucks up is he actually
it's very comic booky.
He ends up winning. Like he wins, but he like points the sword at the wrong, like towards the Shogun.
Yep.
And that's like
which is
the ultimate sin. Like you don't even point your sword at the Shogun. And so he's immediately lost. So he's like brought shame to his clan.
Yeah.
But
that's the guy who they fake his death in the third film.
Yeah.
It's anyway, there's a lot of really cool comic booky elements in this series that you definitely get to see them in Shogun Assassin, but it continues. Like the series continues with some really cool, like weird over the top stuff that is straight out of a comic book. A guy being able to put a mask on his face and become somebody else is obviously one of those. There's also one in I think also the third film where Ogami is in like a Buddhist temple, and these Buddha statues that are all around him are actually ninjas in disguise, and he fights all these ninjas who are dressed up as Buddha.
Wow.
It's awesome. It's
Holy
so
shit.
Cool.
That's
he
awesome.
fights zombies in the 6th movie.
The Supreme Ninja, the woman, one of her big things is also when she's killing the samurai, she chops off their knots. Like she has to chop off their knots and collect
which
them.
brings like shame to their whole family.
Yeah. Which was also going to bring up my other wrestling references. Like it was more brutal than like Brutus Bar Beefcake.
Wow. I was going to say it's like taking Rey Mysterio's mask off of him.
Yeah, true.
And
Also
bringing
true.
shame upon his whole family.
That works as well.
But
it's like a Klingon not fighting. There we go.
No, that doesn't work as well.
I don't.
Damn it.
Kudos, I guess.
That one.
Shit.
It's not really the same thing. So speaking of the Supreme Ninja, though, my favorite move of hers is that her kimono has an ejector seat.
Yeah. Fuck.
That's by far. I mean, if we're going there, that's by far the weirdest moment that I wanted to bring up in the movie.
I love it. She ejects out and then sprints backwards the entire way, keeping eye contact with you the whole time too. I love it. I love it so much. She's wearing just like fishnet underneath, I guess.
Yeah. Like a fishnet bodysuit.
It's a hell of a
thing.
move. Listen, if you're fighting someone and they eject themselves right the fuck out of their kimono and then just run away from you while looking at you the entire time, I'm freaked out.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Oh yeah.
I guess that's true.
That's psychological. That's right. That's the cerebral assassin is what you would call
Triple
her.
H. You just brought the truth. This whole episode is going to be wrestling based. Let's just make an episode. We should make a bonus episode where we compare what wrestling storyline closely matches this film. But no, that was the whole thing with this movie that works for me is just how I feel like I saw this in a review somewhere. Somebody quoted it this way, but so forgive me, but dreamlike this whole thing is.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just
Dream logic. And I mean, and I think that comes from its origins as a comic book, because it is, you know, as much as Koike likes to ground his stories in real events and real periods of history, like he's also definitely like a comic book writer, and he's writing for the masses, and he's putting in a bunch of weird, crazy stuff that would not happen in real life, but that's what makes it so fun.
right. Exactly.
Well, so this new edit that's being worked on by Robert Houston and David Wiseman, which, by the way, Robert Houston is credited as the director on this, but by all accounts, it seems like him and Wiseman basically co-directed it, this new edit themselves, like together. It might have been like a DGA thing. I'm not sure why only Houston gets the directing credit. Maybe it's because Misumi also has a directing credit on it, and there's probably something weird going on there, but I'm not really sure. But this has voice dubbing by Lamont Johnson, who's he's an actor. He's done a ton of voice work and a ton of stuff if you look up his IMDb. But also an unknown Sandra Bernhardt does, some of our younger listeners might not know who she is, but she's a stand-up comedian. It's probably big in, I'd say, the late 80s, early 90s probably was kind of her time. She does the Supreme Ninjas voice.
I mean, to go back to something we talked about previously in another episode, like Hudson Hawk, she's in that movie. And, so she's there. But she did it for she was unknown, like Justin said. She did it for like a $200 flat fee. And if I'm not mistaken, she did every female voice in this movie.
Oh, yeah? Not just the ninja?
Not just the Supreme Ninja. That's just like the most notable female that's in the movie.
Right.
But like she filled in like every woman's voice.
And the voice of Daigoro, the kid, was dubbed by a kid named Gibran Evans, who was the son of Jim Evans. Jim Evans was an illustrator who's responsible for the film's iconic poster. It's a badass poster. And for the title treatment in the film. Like when you see Shogun Assassin hit the screen, that's his artwork. And his son did the voice. Basically, he does more dialogue than anyone else in the movie.
Yeah, that's true. God, I didn't even think about that.
I honestly think the kids' narration adds a lot to this movie.
Oh, yeah.
I think so too,
you hear it like, even if you've never seen this movie, like we talked about Wu-Tang last week, last week when we talked about 36 Chamber of Shaolin. If you've ever heard Liquid Swords,
I was about to say they use this. Like
he uses a lot. He uses that voiceover, but he uses a lot of sound clips from specifically not Lone Wolf and Cub, but specifically from Shogun Assassin.
Wow.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's something about the kid's voiceover, because that is absent in the original films, but it adds like a touch of, I don't know, softness to the film for a film that's so like over the top violent. Because the thing is, in this version,
calm in the storm a little bit.
Well, yeah. Because the original Lone Wolf and Cub movies, there is a lot of focus on the relationship between the father and son. And you see these tender moments, and you see a couple of those in this. Like you see them in the bath, and things like that when they when they check into that hotel. But a lot of that stuff, which is a big part of the series, honestly, it's a big part of the series because, again, that's what Koike was trying to show, was this father-son relationship. A lot of that gets cut out of Shogun Assassin, and it focuses more on the kind of crazy elements, the over-the-top violence and the more exploitation movie elements of it. So I think having that voiceover and getting that point of view from Daigoro's, own mouth, I think it adds a lot to the movie, actually, that you might have missed with those other scenes being cut out.
I agree. And one of the things I hated about a lot of reviews of this, and again, this is at the time, and this is clearly a Grindhouse film, and we're going to get into that, I'm sure. But like it just, a lot of the reviews seem to focus in on A, the chubbiness, and B, is this kid's very aware for such a young child and blah, blah, blah. But watching it back, I watched it again today, and the kid's saying he doesn't remember most of this specifically. He remembers the ninjas, the bodies falling, and the blood, and he has visuals of that. He's not saying I'm this age right now and I'm telling you this story. It's like a child, like later on recanting, like, or not recanting, but recapping like what happened with him and his father. And so anyway,
it reminds me a lot of Road to Perdition.
Yo, we're going to get into that, bud.
Ooh. Oh yeah. It should remind you of Road to Perdition.
That's a very good, astute observation, Todd.
Thank you.
So another very notable update on this is this new synth heavy, very 1980s score, the musical score, which is obviously not the original score. I think they also changed some of the sound effects and stuff in this, but this new musical score was by W. Michael Lewis and Mark Lindsay. Mark Lindsay was the lead singer of Paul Revere and the Raiders. So that's mostly what he's known for. He didn't do a lot of movie scores, but this is a kick-ass movie score.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I love it too. I think it's fantastic.
I've got it on vinyl. I've had it. I got it a couple years ago at Record Store Day. I love this album. I listen to it fairly often.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like some people write it off. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is just super popular, but I think they're credited in this as the Wonderland Philharmonic.
Yeah, which is just some bullshit they made up.
Yeah, well, I think that's the house that Lindsay lived in. I was trying to look that up, and he called it Wonderland, like the studio.
Isn't that where John Holmes murdered somebody? Wonderland?
Holy shit. Maybe. Wow. Maybe.
I mean, the Wonderland murders. Those are the Wonderland murders.
Oh, man. I should have researched that even further. He uses some of who was it? Kazuo Okami, who like originally did the music. He used some cues and some stuff in there, but I mean, this is a great soundtrack. And Paul Revere and the Raiders, I mean, they're not like one of the most famous bands in the world or anything, but they were around. They had the song like "Kicks Keep Getting Harder to Find." Like they had that song, but I guess most notably, just if we connect it around, is they're all over in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Paul Revere and the Raiders are used in that soundtrack. Good Thing is one of their songs, and that's like in the biggest trailer from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That's part of them. So, maybe Quentin's a fan. Yeah. Maybe Quentin's a fan of that.
So the film was released to the Grindhouse circuit by Roger Corman's New World Pictures, and it became a big hit. Like it was, I mean, again, very small investment on this. The guys, they paid $50,000 to Toho. They had about 3 people dubbing all the voices, including themselves. And then they sold it to Roger Corman, who Roger Corman ain't going to pay a whole lot for anything. So it was a big hit. But, Gary, you mentioned that you've read some of the reviews of this. Have you read any modern day reviews on this? Some internet reviewers?
Yeah, well, Justin, as with any
he says
movie,
that with an exasperated sigh. Yeah, I read some.
There were the professional reviewers that would have been fine, but we always have to find like the less well known, the internet commenters that eventually, as you read through them all, you realize that somebody needs a nap. So this first one is from Lost Nightmare 416. I will say this: Shogun Assassin as a whole has some bad reviews. I couldn't find many below like 3 stars or 4 stars, which is interesting. Yeah, and then when you go to Lone Wolf and Cub, which I also tried to do, you don't find any very low at all. Like that's
Lone Wolf and Cub is very well loved.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, even the worst of these are still like, I have to say, not 1-star reviews, like 3-star at worst. Anyway, Lost Nightmare 416's title of his review is so awful it was a mammoth. Stay tuned.
What?
It'll explain itself, sort of.
Okay.
This film is absolutely terrible. All the way through those long, drawn-out hours of watching it, all I could think of was, when is this film going to end? Initially, I thought it was quite amusing that this tiny little child was going around with this mammoth of a man, killing all these people. I thought it was some rubbish comedy, but nope. It was even worse when I actually realized this film was meant to be taken seriously. Who really can take enjoyment out of this film? We see the mammoth take a bath with the child. We see the mammoth slaughter bunches of people. Why couldn't the mammoth just die? Anyways, do not watch this film unless you're a boring old fart. That is that review.
I think that just revealed a lot about us, guys.
Yeah.
We're a bunch of boring old.
Dr. Gonzo says, crap, watch the real Kazuo Koike series instead.
Dr. Gonzo.
Yeah, Dr. Gonzo.
From Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
That's him.
He's famous.
He says, this movie is crap. Basically a mesh of 6 really cool samurai movies mixed into one film that's utter trash and totally likes the feel of the originals. Ignore the rave reviews of the people who just don't know any better. Robert Houston, in quotes, the director, is actually a washed-up actor from the 70s. Ugh! Another example of Hollywood taking something great and regurgitating it onto movie screens for retarded mass audiences to lap up. I noticed most people who remember watching this movie in the 80s are overrating this movie big time. I think perhaps they are not putting aside childhood nostalgia and voting based on that. I watched this in the 80s and I wasn't really impressed. However, when I saw the originals from the 70s, I was blown away. That's also when I noticed that the English dubbed voices are horrid. Ito Agame's voice / dialogue in Shogun Assassin is simply ridiculous. Look at this voiceover cast. Sandra Bernhard? Jesus, what nonsense. The real voice of Thomas Saburo Wakayami, I'm trying to read his spelling of this, is powerful, and his laugh is haunting and scary at the same time. I also love how the super hacks David Wiseman and Robert Houston credit themselves as, in quotes, writers. It makes me sick. Skip right over this mess and watch the other series instead. So he needs a nap, and
he needs a nap. And
was that in all caps, Gary?
It feels like it should be. Actually, if I could, there's another one here from Govind Singh Themed. He says, this needs to be taken off the website and added to the list of banned films in the USA and hopefully the world. And finally, and I'll stop, Bob Lipton, his title is, Were They Serious? What did the people who made this movies and others in the series think of it? And them? Would they even tell the truth if you asked? When this sort of bloodbath flick becomes popular, did they think they were entertaining a brave new world that had such people in it? Or did they think that, well, it's a job and they need a paycheck, so learn the lines, don't trip over the furniture? Or did they view the audience with contempt, like sneering at a bunch of 4-year-olds offered a box of Malabars each? Stupid kids! I'll bet if we offer you Cheetos, you'll eat them too.
What's wrong with Cheetos?
I love Cheetos.
Cheetos are great.
No, I was hoping you guys should shed some light on that. That was a legit review, though. Actually, from April of 2020. So Bob Lipton,
wow,
very angry, needs a nap.
Too angry. Well, so the film, it's another one of those. It's a Grindhouse movie, so finding reviews from the time it came out are kind of difficult. But it was released on home video in the UK in 1983 and almost became banned because of its excessive violence. It was not put on like the video nasties list or anything, but it came pretty close. But you know what? That excessive violence is part of what makes the movie so fun.
Yeah, there was actually a review. If you go look at the IMDb, there is a review of the film who is a guy who says, we'll see, but he says he was a sound engineer for the film. He mentions that it was banned in 83 in the US after it had come out in Grindhouse Cinema for the scene where he, strips the woman down and like wants to warm up or whatever.
I mean, it is a little rapey, but
yeah, because it seems a little rapey. And he was just saying it's like, it was pretty significant at the time that people were just like, whoa, this is too much. But anyway, yeah. It's hard finding stuff. I mean, most of the stuff, like I said, like the professional reviews are just like, oh, it's fun, but it's, fat samurai, this kid, they're, the kid seems real smart. He's telling the story.
I love it. I love this movie. I think it's a ton of fun. And normally I would view something like this more cynically. It's a couple of Americans buying up a Japanese film. They chop it up, they dub it, re-release it. And it sounds like it's just like a cash grab kind of thing, on paper. And most of the time, that's probably what it would be. But something about this, you know,
it can be done and done well. This is a perfect example.
Yeah, normally you'd talk about a movie that was done like this, and it'd be just a footnote when talking about the original film.
Right.
But this movie deserves like to be seen on its own, I think. I think it's really fun. Now, I'm not going to pretend that it's as good as the Lone Wolf and Cub movies, but it's a different thing. It's more fun than the first Lone Wolf and Cub movie. The first Lone Wolf and Cub movie has a lot of world building that's throwing a lot of the names of like Japanese clans and Japanese history at you that it's hard to grasp if you're not familiar with that history. Now the second, once you get into like the end of that one and into the second one and the rest of them, they're all just a fucking blast. And the first one's still very good. I mean, it's just, it throws a lot of information at you at once, but this movie, what it does is it breezes over that stuff by just showing you enough to let you know who Ito Agami is by using those first like 12 minutes of Lone Wolf and Cub. And then it gets you into all the fun shit from the second movie, which I kind of love that about it. Like, this is a fun movie.
Oh
yeah. I thought the same thing, man. I thought that, like, you know, I get it. I get if some people have read, you know, these manga or were fans of the Japanese version before, which, you know, with American audiences, I feel like, first of all, probably the reason this is so huge is because of Shogun Assassin. So anyway, but
well, that's the thing. I think this is an integral part of Lone Wolf and Cub's legacy, because I do think most people in America, this is probably their first exposure, maybe their only exposure to the Lone Wolf and Cub series.
Right. And I think that it's amazing. Like, even having gone back and even having read the original manga, like, there's stuff about this that is just, it's created to be a grindhouse movie, and it serves that purpose fully. Like, it's exactly what it's supposed to be. I mean, and I will say this, they take nothing from your main, like, lone wolf character. They don't ruin him at all. They don't touch him.
No, he's the same guy.
He's the same guy. They just deliver everything in this easily digestible way and get you to like, just make it a blast. Like, it's just a fun movie. And they're right on the edge of like being ridiculous, but there's still something brutal about the violence that happens in it. And, but there's something fun, like, you know, seeing people's heads cut off and blood spurting out their necks, or seeing their legs cut off and like some stumps just sitting there on the ground. And like, there's just somebody's head getting a sword halfway through it. And like, there's some wicked shit. And of course, you know, like you mentioned, Miss Kimono, like, bouncing out of her outfit, running backwards.
Such a bizarre, it's so weird.
And mixed with that soundtrack, like, it just feels like a perfect grindhouse movie.
It's like something that on paper should not work.
Right.
But it works. Yeah. It works so well.
It really does.
It works.
It's
so
everything
well.
you ever heard about, like, martial arts movies. Like if you heard stories about like how cool kung fu movies or whatever, I feel like a lot of this movie is what you're hoping to see. Like, just the insanity of sword fight and like just these people getting slaughtered brutally.
Yeah.
And then there's crazy stuff like the guy with gushing blood out of his neck talking about always wanting to hear that sound. And and
the fact that people have like full on monologues while they've got like a sword line going straight down their face with blood pouring out, but they're just still talking to you for a few minutes before they die.
It's crazy. Like, I don't know. There's something really awesome about this movie, and I'm not going to tell anybody ever to not watch the OGs or read the manga, because if you want like an in-depth story, you know, you want to really understand what the original like Koike is going for in that story, then fine. I mean, this is definitely valuable and it's a very cool story. But if you want to have a blast, just like watching a movie, like, this is a fun ass movie. And like you said, I guess even the Lone Wolf and Cub series even gets this way. But man, Shogun Assassin's awesome. And I didn't even care that I didn't understand everything. Like, I mean, like, why all of a sudden the Shogun just wanted this dude dead, or, you know,
right.
whatever.
Yeah, which is all obviously that's all fleshed out pretty well in the full series, but that's not what they're going for in this. They just want an excuse to have fun and have an excuse for Ogami to just chop a bunch of limbs off. And I love that mashup of historical stuff and like very over the top, a modern approach to like an action movie. Cause I mean, I love that baby cart. I love that baby cart that can do everything. It's bulletproof on the bottom. And yet in some of the movies it floats behind a boat, despite the bulletproof plate on the bottom.
Sure.
It's got swords and it's got swords inside of it everywhere. It's got a machine gun in it. I don't think you see that in Shogun Assassin.
No.
But in one of the movies, it's got a full-on machine gun inside of it. So it's a pretty badass piece of engineering. Ogami definitely had a second career as an engineer when he built that cart. But then you've got, I mean, all these other over-the-top elements. I mean, the Masters of Death. What a cool bunch of characters.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, those guys are very comic booky. You know, they've got the hats on like the three dudes from Big Trouble in Little China, you know, the big straw hats. And I love that each one has their own like preferred weapon. One's got like the Wolverine claw thing. One's got just a club with spikes on it. Like it's awesome. You know, it's really cool. And they defy gravity. You know, people much like in 36 Chamber of Shaolin, you know, people will float when they need to, hop on top of another person when they need to. That scene with the burning ship is when he does that pole vault over the side of the ship, like he tosses his kid out into the water, and then pole vaults like through the fire. It's a hell of a stunt.
Yeah,
like it is, and I don't know if that was Wakayama or if that was someone else. You can't see his face during it, but whoever did it, like that's crazy.
Yeah.
like he looked like he was in true danger.
To be honest, like there was something about the opening credits and I think, you know, the kid's opening monologue that just sucked me in, like from the word go. And I was locked in. I don't think I touched my phone once. I mean, I was dialed in on this one. This is really great. Really fantastic.
I love it. I think it's so much fun. And it's like, it's the purest, like, I don't know, man. I think Gary said it best. Like they made this a more easily digestible, more accessible version of the original Lone Wolf movies. Mm-hmm. And that's not in any way a dig on those movies. I think the Lone Wolf movies are, all the ones I've seen are incredible. They really are. They ran for 6 movies. Series runs for 6 movies. 4 of those came out in 1972. Right. All in the same year. They came out with the 5th one came out in 75 or 73, and the 6th one came out in 74. So 6 movies over a period of 2 years. 4 of those were directed by Misumi, and several were actually released in the U.S. market and marketed as Shogun Assassin sequels. So like Baby Cart to Hades, Lone Wolf and Cub, Baby Cart to Hades. They all have amazing titles, by the way. Awesome. Was released as Shogun Assassin 2, Lightning Swords of Death, another badass name. Yeah. Lone Wolf and Cub, Baby Cart in Peril was released as Shogun Assassin 3, Slashing Blades of Carnage.
Nice.
Lone Wolf and Cub, Baby Cart in the Land of Demons, which was the 5th one, was released as Shogun Assassin 4, 5 Fistfuls of Gold. Not as good of a title. I think Baby Cart in the Land of Demons is better. And then Lone Wolf and Cub, White Heaven and Hell, which is the final one, was released as Shogun Assassin 5, Cold Road to Hell. Nice. So there are 5 Shogun Assassin movies, 6 Lone Wolf and Cub movies. I guess that is probably a good time to get into our new segment.
Further viewing.
So I don't know if you guys have anything here, but Todd mentioned Road to Perdition earlier, so I think we have to discuss that a little bit. Road to Perdition was, of course, based on a comic book, and Max Allan Collins, the writer of the Road to Perdition comic book, has gone on record as saying that he was heavily influenced by Lone Wolf and Cub, by the comic.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, because like there's the kid, monologue, and the very quiet, very deadly dad. Like, I mean, this has all the all the same elements, just different time period and different country.
Yeah. Obviously, other ones that would be good further viewing in this case are the other Lone Wolf and Cub movies.
Sure. Well,
That's
this made me think of as I was watching it, with all the violence and the music together, it really made me think of Afro Samurai. And I love Afro Samurai, especially season 1, just because it's just badass from beginning to end. So if this kind of get you going with sort of the weird, eccentric, but yet very specific characters, and like the cold, quiet hero who's just dead set on the goal. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend, just go ahead and get it on Blu-ray. It's worth having on your shelf.
I loved Afro Samurai. I mean, we'd be stupid not to mention The Mandalorian.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh
I
my
mean,
God.
yes,
Yeah.
Obviously, that is the. If any of this plot sounds familiar, then you've probably watched The Mandalorian, because The Mandalorian is heavily influenced by this. Obviously, with the idea of the child, but that movie, I mean, that show is very influenced by two things: samurai movies and spaghetti westerns.
Yeah.
All the stuff that we love here, it's really cool that something with those influences has become such a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah. Huge. I mean, all the stuff around the holidays, toys and whatnot. And God, just open Etsy and just look for The Mandalorian. Like, you will be inundated with all kinds of stuff.
What's crazy, like, I mean, it's one of those things that, like, those lightning in the bottle story ideas that just will repeat over and over again, and you got to think that those aren't easy to find. I mean, there's so many we see all the time that are like, basically you could recount to, like, back to Shakespeare, like something with this plot, but it's like, here is this father son kind of duo, this guy just protecting this child, like walking through, and like, just, I don't know. It just feels like one of those things that we'll see repeated like multiple times over and over again. It's just
and Jon Favreau, if you watch that Disney Gallery series that's on Disney Plus, he name drops Lone Wolf and Cub. Like, he fully acknowledges that this is an influence.
I only wish that Baby Yoda / Grogu would fire a fucking knife out of the side of his carriage every once in a while into the dick of one of the stormtroopers or something.
So
the other thing it made me think of was Luc Besson's Leon.
Yeah, I can see that a little bit.
Yeah, just the idea of, like, the cold, quiet killer with a young child, and they're traveling together doing the thing. I was like, oh, it's kind of like that thing. But I was thinking about it, it's cool kind of seeing what Americans have done with it, and then what the French have done with it, and and that sort of thing in anime, Afro Samurai. I love seeing the different interpretations.
What's weird with this
similar beats.
We've hit on this already, but just the crazy part to me is like, this is the part where, like Justin said, it apparently can be done. They totally Americanized it. It feels like these guys knew exactly what they were doing. They were making a fucking late night, like, shock film, a cinema shaka. They were they were doing one of these movies, but because it is done so well, it also intrigues you enough to take you to the original source material, I feel like. And so it elevates everything.
Yeah, and if you want to watch other stuff that people who were involved in this or worked on, I would also recommend Hanzo the Razor. Hanzo the Razor is a series of films that star Shintaro Katsu, and the first one I think there are 3 Hanzo the Razors. The first one is directed by Masumi. He actually made it. So Masumi made the first 3 Lone Wolf and Cub movies. Needed a break because he'd made 3 within 1 year. But then he goes and makes Hanzo the Razor, same year, 1972 as well. So he's still making another movie, just a different one.
That one take a break. What are you going to do? What are you going to do with all your downtime?
I'll make a different movie.
Make another movie.
Then of course, Buchi Sato did the next one, and then Masumi returned for the 5th Lone Wolf and Cub. But Hanzo the Razor is really cool. It's on Criterion as well. I know that's where Gary watched this movie. So that's about the only place you can stream it unless you have a Blu-ray of it. I would also say the Zatoichi series, 26 movies. There's plenty to choose from. They all star Shintaro Katsu. They ran from 1962 to 1989, 26 films. One of those was remade as Blind Fury, starring Rutger Hauer. Remember that one?
Oh, yeah.
About 1989, 1990 or so. Yeah, so Zatoichi, they're also out by Criterion, so they're very easy to find. Either there's a giant box set with all 26 of them, or you can watch any of them on the Criterion channel, So they're about a blind swordsman. So it's another kind of, and that was kind of part of the appeal when they were making Lone Wolf and Cub, was the idea of having, this was Koike mentions this in an interview, the idea of having a samurai with a handicap. So you've got Zatoichi, who is blind. What's another kind of handicap? And the way that he saw it was you make him vulnerable by giving him a child, because the way that he explains it when he's writing the comic book is that if you're writing a comic, that the main character has to live or the comic book's over, right?
Yeah.
So that you have to give them some sort of weakness, something to make the audience worry. That's why Superman has kryptonite,
Mm-hmm.
So what do? You give him a child, and then he might be okay, but is the kid gonna be okay through this whole thing? So that was sort of the way that he approached it, is that the kid is his weakness. So he kind of got that idea from Zatoichi, because Zatoichi had been being produced before he came up with the idea for Lone Wolf and Cub.
Nice. That's
pretty
cool.
There was a Lone Wolf and Cub TV series as well that ran in like the mid 70s. Koike is also very vocal about his dislike of the TV show, but he loves the movies. Of course, he wrote, I think, 5 of the 6 movies. I think he wrote 5 of them, 4 or 5 of them. So he was pretty well involved. There was also a video game, it's like a side scroller beat 'em up based on Shogun Assassin that came out in the late 80s called Samurai Assassin. I don't know. It was like an arcade only release.
There's also Hawk and Chick.
I don't know this one.
Yeah, if you watch Bob's Burgers season 5, episode 20,
yeah,
and then season 10, episode 6, there's they interact with this late night B movie series from Japan called Hawk and Chick, and it's clearly a Lone Wolf and Cub spoof.
Nice.
Yeah, it's fun.
And there's been talk of doing an American remake, but nothing's ever really gotten off the ground.
Well, Paramount and Justin Lin have been working on this for forever.
It's been a while though since I've heard anything.
I could find stuff back. And Darren Aronofsky at one point was set to helm like an iteration of it.
Wow.
Andrew Kevin Walker, the guy who wrote 7, Sleepy Hollow, Panic Room, he apparently has like a treatment out there for it. That I think 2019 was the latest I could find anything about it. And then, so maybe pandemics even offset all that. Now I think it would come out and people would be like, your copy of The Mandalorian.
Right. Yeah.
So,
you're right. It probably would be hard to do now, honestly, because of The Mandalorian. But, it's a great movie. And I would encourage
Ogami? I don't know.
Yeah. I would encourage you, if you watched Shogun Assassin, to go back and watch the Lone Wolf and Cub movies. They're all really outstanding, honestly. They're all worth watching. It's not like a series where there's like diminishing returns on each installment. The second movie, which makes up the bulk of Shogun Assassin, is, I think, the quintessential Lone Wolf and Cub movie. But the sequels, the third one, the fourth one, they're all really cool and really fun. They all have a lot of ridiculous shit going on, just like this one. They do. The fourth one dials in the bloodshed a little bit because they had a new director who wasn't quite as interested in doing that, but it's still pretty damn bloody, and there's still a lot of cool fights and stuff. And Wakayama is just a badass to watch. I mean, some of the things that he does with that sword, the way that he twirls it and then puts it into the sheath, like he's a fucking gunfighter twirling a pistol, but doing it with a sword after slicing 3 people. The quickness that he does that is one of the coolest things to watch to me. I mean, it's just so fun.
It's also crazy to me that like one thing I think is cool is to like build up characters, like you said, the Masters of Death or whatever, like just to be these like notoriously badass gang, but still when they run up on this guy, like he's kind of like, nah, sorry, you're still not this good.
Dude, the scene in the desert where the guy with the claws into the sand and you see blood starting to pool.
Yeah.
What a great visual, man. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
There are so many shots like that in this that are pure like pulp entertainment, you know?
Yeah.
It's just
it was so much fun because Kat was watching with me and was just like, oh wow, like that really happened. And I was like, well, if you got to attack somebody in a desert, where are you gonna hide?
Yeah. I like how he pokes a couple of them and then the rest of them just pop up like, well,
yeah, there we go.
This is not working. Anyway, that's about all we got for Shogun Assassin. I'm really glad that you guys enjoyed it. I'd seen it before, but it has been, gosh, I think there was a Blu-ray by Enemigo or somebody that came out, and I want to say it was a couple years after Kill Bill. So probably 2007, 2008, something like that. And I rented it back then, back when Netflix was still a thing you got in the mail. But this is the first time I've seen it since then. So I would highly recommend the Lone Wolf box set that Criterion has out. That's how I watch these. They're gorgeous Blu-rays. If you're watching them on Criterion channel, it's the same transfer. They look outstanding. And the thing with Shogun Assassin is that because this was like a Grindhouse movie, there weren't really any good prints for them to go by. So and I'm assuming that Criterion is using Enemigo's reconstructed version of this, because what Enemigo did when they released that back in the early 2000s was they had to go to the original elements of Lone Wolf Cub and reconstruct Shogun Assassin based on shitty bootlegs, because that's all that was available for years, to find out where the cuts went. And they basically reconstructed it and re-edited it themselves. Luckily, they still had the sound elements, but there wasn't a good visual copy of it, so they had to essentially make the movie all over again.
I was going to say, like, having to use it as a blueprint. That's wild. That's wild to think about.
It's pretty cool because for years and years, there was no way to find this movie. This is the 6th episode and final degree of Kill Bill, but we've still got 1 episode left in this series because we've talked about all the movies that inspired Kill Bill. We can't end this series without talking about the movie itself. So we're going to be talking about Kill Bill itself next week. We're talking about Volume 1. We're talking about Volume 2. We're talking about The Whole Bloody Affair. I don't have a copy of The Whole Bloody Affair, so I'm not actually going to talk about that, but unless you guys can find me a copy. If somebody can find me a copy of The Whole Bloody Affair, I would really.
I don't know. We'll see.
But we're talking about Kill Bill, the entire saga, next week on the show. So you guys know where to find it. It's on fucking HBO Max right now. It's very easy to find. So we'll be back next week for that. That'll be the final episode of this series, and we're moving on to something completely different in 2 weeks.
We'll tell another story after that. But for now, the reason we've been talking about all these movies is up next week. Kill Bill said, you could watch it and be like, I know her. I know him.
I know where that's from. I know where that's from. I know what movie they're watching. I know why she has that eye patch.
I know why Quentin Tarantino never had an original idea in his life. Somebody definitely said that on Twitter.
Said that to us on Twitter. And we didn't engage because people like that are just looking for reasons to argue. Yeah. I feel like it's probably more frustrating for them if we don't argue back.
Exactly.
Which is quietly entertaining to me.
I'm so sorry I missed that because I would have totally engaged.
The easiest way with that is they want you to fight back. So it's just just
fuck them. That's why
it gives them power.
Yeah.
Trolls beware. Synth shock.
Trolls.
will ignore you.
Todd can be canceled, and he will engage.
That's true.
Everything that you
we've done
shouldn't
this show-
do
we
on
did the show
social
for-
media, Todd does. Go for it.
We did the show for a long time without Todd. We can do it again without him. You always remember that, Todd.
I'll keep it in
Anyway,
mind.
Todd, for now, where can you be found on the internet?
I'm at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all the socials.
And also,
And I didn't know if we were still running the ad or not, but
well, the ad says coming in January, so we're probably going to either need a new ad.
Yeah. Okay,
since it
so
is January.
Oh,
if you like Star Trek, come listen to my show, Computer Resume podcast. It is at Computer Resume on all the socials.
Do you have to explain to people what Computer Resume podcast means? Because it sounds like it could be like a podcast about computer shit.
I thought it was Computer Resume.
Computer resume.
I've gotten someone else who was like Computer Resume. I'm like, no, there's not a little. It's Computer Resume. God damn it. I tried to find a really good. I was stuck on Trexperts for the longest time, and I couldn't figure out a decent logo or a decent spelling for Trexperts that I liked. So I went with Computer Resume.
Trexperts just sound like Trekkies just coming everywhere.
Yeah. You're hearing the frustrations of forming a brand right here, folks.
Anyway, Computer Resume podcast, despite the fact that the name doesn't sound like it has anything to do with Star Trek, it does.
It does. And the logo has a big Starfleet, thing
Sure.
with a microphone on it. So it's kind of, there you go.
You find the logo first.
Yeah. You find the logo first.
Really important for an audio podcast.
I'm all about the visuals. I'm all about the visuals for audio podcasts, guys.
Anyway, that first episode will be dropping any day now.
Yeah,
probably. Your episode 0 is out as we're recording, but
yeah,
episode 1 I think will probably be out around.
I said February 15th. I wanted to give myself some time to schedule some folks and do some research, and I'm not as familiar with editing, so I'm getting my feet wet doing the editing, and we're moving right along.
Yeah, so this episode that we're talking on right now, this will drop on like the 11th.
Oh,
so
okay.
We'll be very close to that release date.
Nice.
Yeah. Gary, what about you? Where can you be found on the internet?
I'm at This Is Gary Horn. I also have another brand called This Is Pro Wrestling. If you'd like to hear the reverse of this and hear me talk about wrestling and relate it to movie instances, you could do it there. It's at TIPW
and
Show.
The name This Is Pro Wrestling tells me exactly what your podcast is about.
Right? It's called Stone Cold Resume. That's what we got. Changing the name as of now.
I am at Justin_Bishop. I do not have another podcast because I spend too much time on this one. So until next week. Cinema _shock. I forgot that. You can follow the podcast, Cinema _shock, Twitter, Instagram. Go to Facebook. We're at cinemashock.net. You can find merch, buy our t-shirts. You can, find all the episodes. Go listen to some old shit. I don't know. Find links to subscribe, rate, and review. I'm saying all the things that people are supposed to say at the end of a podcast.
You're doing it. You're doing great.
Show us to all your friends and neighbors.
Yeah, share us.
Even if you don't like them. Maybe because you don't like them.
Upload these episodes to Pornhub.
Yeah, do it. We're not going to do it. They're only taking verified accounts now, and I don't know what it takes to get verified, but I'm not sure that I want to find out.
We can find out.
Until next week.
I'll do a lot for this podcast, guys. So we'll off mic, we'll discuss what needs to be done to make
we'll
that
figure
happen.
it out.
Yeah.
Prepare for some solo Todd videos.
I have no problems taking my shirt off on camera. This has been
those Step Todd videos are trending.
Well documented.
What are you doing, Step Todd? All right. May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.
Johnny Wakagi o Mati and Mas.
You nailed it.
Thank you.
I bet that's accurate. I'm not going to.